The new line of Tudor Black Bays have been received very well by the community. As mentioned many times before, it is phenomenal to see just how far the brand has come after its modern revival, and the variety of pieces now being offered today is impressive. But some of the community, especially those of us who spend every waking hour waiting for new releases, are beginning to feel that the watches are becoming stale. And I'm here to look at that in more detail. The reality is that their formula of creating homages to Rolex's vintage pieces is working extremely well. They offer something different, but also watches that are affordable, hard-wearing and excellently built. The statement of Tudor being the poor man's Rolex has been questioned and addressed with their newer lines of pieces, especially since the company now makes their movements in-house, and the days of generic ETAs are seemingly in the past. I believe that Tudor has been given the green light to be the creative force in the Rolex family. I will link to a video discussing their creativity in the corner of the screen now. What they can do is be as ludicrous as they want with their pieces. Sure, the designs need to follow a formula, but instead of producing the same sterile watches, they can experiment with colors, materials and finishes, and there is a balance with how their pieces are produced, in contrast to the more linear approach that Rolex takes with their modern line. Tudor, as a company, has always been the more adventurous member of the family, and the company was essentially created to help sell Rolex watches at more affordable prices half a century ago. So by no means have they deviated away from that formula. In fact, they have improved upon it. So addressing the boredom that many people have with the Black Bay line, on one side it is understandable. At this point, the Black Bay is basically the Royal Oak or the Speedmaster of the family, but in the Black Bay line there are many subgenres. The real issue with the line is that the pieces all appear the same on the surface. The cases are very similar, the dials and hands are the same, and the proportions of the watches and bracelets are identical too. There are some rare exceptions with the Pelagos line and the watches in the Heritage line, like the Heritage Chronograph, but again, the reality is that not everybody can be pleased, and this segues into the latest releases from Tudor that seemed to have received mixed responses. The Black Bay P09, or what I prefer to call it, the Commando, caught a lot of attention, and not all of it was good. Here is an example of a prototype that had been brought back after years of not seeing the daylight, and to many it was considered a poor move. In the same video about Tudor's creative license, I mentioned that this watch appeals to me. Not because it is jaw-dropping gorgeous, but it shows what Tudor is capable of when it comes to the openness of creating something. It shows their efforts of recreating a line of watches with great care and attention. It also shows what their ability is for the future of creating watches. Then to one of the main reveals, the Black Bay Chronograph S and G, steel and gold, which I will just call the two-tone. This watch seemed to fly under the radar in many respects because, as mentioned earlier, it is just another Black Bay. It still looks like a Black Bay and hasn't seen a huge leap in its innovation, so for the most part it received a neutral response. The question that I would like to ask and hopefully answer is, was this watch a success or a failure? Many of you know my thoughts on the piece, but it would be interesting to see what they did with the piece and whether it worked. What is this watch paying homage to? The closest reference that many people refer to is the 6241, known as the Rolex Paul Newman Daytona John Player Special, a very sought-after piece in the family. It is interesting to consider that this watch was released in tandem with Rolex's 43mm Sea Dweller in two-tone. Much like the year previously, the new Black Bay GMT was released alongside the Rolex Pepsi GMT on a Jubilee bracelet. We can make assumptions that these are calculated efforts to produce similar watches from the family, and I like the format. It would be nice to see this method continue in the future. Referring back to the Daytona JPS, it falls into the category of being one of the most valuable Paul Newman Daytonas, and one of the most valuable Rolexes in the world. To explain further, I will link an excellent video done by Revolution Watch in the corner of the screen now. And speaking about the design of the watch, it is striking. The black on gold is gorgeous. Pairing these two colors together on a sports watch transforms it into something else, something more formal. It carries such a visual punch. And to emphasize this point, there needs to be a specification on the contrast. A matte black dial with champagne sub-registers, small black hour plots on a gold chapter ring makes this piece a great performing instrument. There is also such a great amount of detail. It can be classified as a chronograph first and a watch second, but at the same time, reading the hour and the minute hands is easy to do because it is on a black dial. So it manages to achieve a lot of things. It basically ticks all the boxes of being both a tool watch and a gorgeous fashion accessory. So with that in mind, Tudor had big shoes to fill when they decided to create their own version of the piece. On first glance, it does have that feel of being a watch inspired by the JPS design, primarily because of the dial and the colors chosen for the bezel. Moving away from that and looking at the case and the bracelet, we start to see something more akin to Tudor and their approach with their Black Bay line of watches, like the large steel case and the two-tone rivet bracelet, and I think that is where everyone sees the clash. To many, this combination looks strange and kind of out of place. Do we see a sports watch? Yes. Do we see a watch focused on formality? Yes, to an extent. What saves the watch is its callback to a more vintage appeal. The approach taken makes the piece look like it's from another time, like the 60s, and that helps. But the presence of the watch on the wrist and the overall size of it brings back the feeling of it being modern. Jarring is an easy enough word to describe it. In saying that, though, the watch does have something else. It is legible, thanks to the use of the usual format of loom plots and the fully loomed hands. So it is easy to read, and at the same time, the sub-registers contrast well against the black dial. There are also nice touches of red used on the text and on the chronograph seconds hand. The date window has been neatly placed at the 6 o'clock position. So as a package, this watch has it all, but steers itself more towards being a sports watch and less of being something more formal, though the approach of blending the two aspects together is interesting. Personally, I love the contrast and the design styling. Black on gold is classic, but also striking. It invokes a feeling of a different time period, and the color scheme makes for a great combination that could be worn with anything. The steel elements lessen the punch of an all-gold watch and makes it all the more casual. The issue I have with the watch is that it borrows too many Black Bay cues. The watch definitely does not need such prominent markers on the dial or snowflake hands. Sure, they aid in legibility, but at the same time, it sort of detracts from the elegance of most chronographs. Those plots should be spared and used on dive watches. In the adjustment you are seeing now, I have attempted to remedy the format in a few places. Other than that, the watch is very interesting, and it does appeal to me, far more than a lot of the other modern pieces that Tudor offers, and I'm sure I'm in the minority. So the Black Bay Chronograph two-tone shows a few things. It makes a statement. It shows that Tudor's DNA still stems from the past watches in the Rolex family, and even now, the brand is willing to have a crack at reproducing obscure and forgotten references with their own touch. You can choose whether or not to take them seriously, but they are standout watches, and some of the best examples of value to be found in the Swiss watchmaking industry.